So if it were not for the archaeological cover-ups and the corruption that happened at the site of Hueyatlaco in the mid-1900s, we may actually have surviving evidence today of Homo sapiens or some other kind of human species living in the Americas between 80,000 and 800,000 years ago. But archaeology has anything but a spotless history. However sterile and clean archaeology presents itself as now, the field is no stranger to guns, thieves, assassinations, heists, cover-ups, or conspiracies. And like any other field run by humans, archaeology can be a dirty business, and I'm not just talking about being down in the dig pits. In the Americas specifically, rivalries among archaeologists have halted new revelations of ancient cultures, men with guns have stopped archaeological sites from being professionally excavated to protect the black market looting business, and hell, fake artifacts even sit in our museums. I've found them. I've had black market Russians reach out to me to sell them artifacts that I found, and obviously I didn't do that. But the point is that archaeology can be a dirty business, and crime and corruption have been some of the primary reasons why archaeological research is either halted, thwarted altogether, or artifacts completely go missing. Hueyatlaco is an archaeological site located in central Mexico that was excavated by Cynthia Irwin Williams in the 1960s. She found sophisticated stone tools that seemed to break the Clovis first model. And for anyone that doesn't know, Clovis first was the idea that the large, well-made stone projectile points that emerged in the Americas some 13,000 years ago were the oldest artifacts that could be found. Anything proposed to be older than Clovis was shut down immediately. Cynthia's dating of her artifacts came back with astonishing numbers that indicate that people could have inhabited Hueyatlaco somewhere around 250,000 or more years ago. And it was this case that I found particularly interesting because just a few decades earlier in the 1930s, debate and rivalry was raging in Mexico about a different ancient site involving the newly recognized Olmecs. The Maya archaeologist had absolutely no intention of acknowledging that the Olmecs were the real progenitor culture of Mesoamerica, and that sparked an entirely different controversy of its own that I will be getting to in a video very soon. So the conversation I have next is with a good friend, Will Brown at Incredible History, who deep dived this controversy last year. And this conversation isn't meant to be a dunk on archaeologists, but really just to share with you guys the story of an archaeological site that could have yielded real evidence of human beings being in the Americas between 80,000 to 800,000 years ago. Needless to say, far, far further in the distant past than anyone has ever thought possible. But because of modern day corruption, it is unlikely that anybody will ever know the full truth of Hueyatlaco. And we'll get right to that after a word from today's sponsor. Okay, so I have been in need of a desk upgrade for a long time now, like a really long time. So when FlexiSpot reached out to do a collaboration together, it was an instant yes. I spend an absolutely ridiculous amount of time sitting at the computer working, whether that's doing research or editing videos, and that can actually be pretty bad for your leg health. And I had always wished I had a desk that could raise up tall enough for me to stand on. But with FlexiSpot, all I've got to do is hit this button right here, and look how quickly this rises. So right here, I'm able to sit up here and work. Honestly, I really think that this is probably the best product that I've ever received from a channel sponsor. I mean, this is a complete game changer for my workflow. So much better for your leg health, so much better for your mental health. I can stand and work. I'm so happy with this. And as if that already wasn't good enough, they also sent me this treadmill or this walking pad that goes underneath the desk. So I can sit here, do my work, do my research, and edit my videos while getting my steps in, which honestly I don't do enough of when I'm at home. Total game changer. Definitely the best product I've ever received from a sponsor, and I would recommend this to everybody. This seems like a complete necessity. So the treadmill has a 9-level automatic incline adjustment, it's Bluetooth compatible, and it can carry the weight of up to 275 pounds, and all of that with a 2-year warranty. The desk itself is rock solid. It comes with a 15-year warranty, and it can hold up to 440 pounds, no problem. and it's got a height range of 25 to 50 inches. So whether you want to sit or whether you want to stand, whether you're short or tall, it's going to fit everybody. I mean, honestly, this is such an amazing desk. FlexiSpot is having a mega sale right now, so if you're interested, don't miss out. Shop now, and if you liked it, leave a note saying Luke Caverns at checkout and use my code YTE730 to save an extra $30 off and get your own E7 Pro standing desk. If you have a limited budget, you can choose their E7. Click the link in the description to learn more. And thank you again to FlexiSpot for sponsoring this video. Now, back to the show. All right, Will, good to see you again, man. So, I have to ask, do you think that humans have been in the Americas for some 200,000 plus years?
Maybe. The answer is definitely not a definitive no. I know that's a double negative, but like it's the only way I can kind of describe this because you're about to hear the mess of Hueyatlaco. Today, we can just talk about all the evidence, and I'll kind of stick away from too much speculation as to why this has maybe been suppressed, and we can just let the audience decide if that sounds good to you.
Yeah, for sure, man. Well, I know the story of Hueyatlaco through you, but for a lot of people, it's going to be their very first time hearing it. So for anybody who's not up to speed on even where Hueyatlaco is, catch everybody up.
Yeah, so I think a good way to start is that we need to understand that right now, the predominant belief, and actually at the time, the predominant belief was that humans had only been in the Americas for about 12, 13,000 years. Now that's been pushed back quite a bit. And I'd like to preface this by saying this has not ever been an attempt to dunk on archaeologists. You're going to hear a lot of the skeptics of this case in this video. I believe are good archaeologists just doing their jobs, but there were some serious problems with Hueyatlaco. So at the time, you have Clovis first as the predominant model. A lot of people are familiar with that from like grade school. In your textbook, you'd have like the little travel line on the map showing the migration from Asia through the ice-free corridor in the Alaska area about 12,000, 13,000 years ago, whatever that would be, down to the Americas. But there's a place called Hueyatlaco in Mexico. In 1959, there was a discovery made by an amateur archaeologist named Juan Armenta Camacho. And when I say amateur, I just think he didn't have the credentials, but he'd been doing this like for most of his life. And it was kind of like that back then, especially in Mexico. And he found this fossilized, I believe, we'll just call it an Ice Age bone. I believe it was a hip bone of a camel, a North American camel, but I could be wrong on that. But we'll just call it an Ice Age bone. And he quickly noticed that there was carvings on it, a depiction of what appeared to be a hunting scene. And Luke, I'll give you those images so you can throw those up later and edit. And so he immediately starts contacting people. By the way, this is out in Puebla, Mexico, along the shores of a reservoir out there. And he immediately starts contacting people that he knows in the archaeological community. He had enough respect that he'd built up a good repertoire with them. He'd had enough respect that he'd built up a good reputation with them. And they immediately became intrigued, and this fossil gets tested. And it was carved on something called green bone, which means that it would have been carved soon after the death of this animal. And so this is a big deal because this thing is fossilized. And generally speaking, obviously conditions are going to change the pace of how long it takes for something to be fossilized. But generally speaking, that means that this was at least 10,000 years old. And that was a big deal. That's really, really old. And so just to also be clear here, this fossil in particular is not the artifact that gets dated to some of these crazy numbers we're going to talk about. So long story short, the American Geological Survey, a bunch of really good archaeologists come out, including one named Cynthia Irwin Williams, and they start excavating at Hueyatlaco. And they start to find artifacts underneath a layer of ash called the Hueyatlaco ash, which is really great because that gives you something that you can date, right? You can date volcanic ash. And so they start getting everything prepared because they found clear objects in multiple layers of bed. They start excavating here at this site and they find artifacts that are clearly human made artifacts in bed C, E, and I. And we're going to talk about bed C, E, and I because that's where the drama is in just a moment. But Dr. Cynthia Irwin Williams, submits her data, her notes, and they now need the geology team to come in and date that Hueyatlaco ash. And when they date it, a geologist named Hal Malday is who was in charge of that. And it dates to 22,000 years. This is carbon dating. At the time, remember, this is the early 1960s. That's the best they have. Now, carbon dating's got a lot of issues. We know that. But that was a big no-no. That's extremely old. So immediately they start to get attacked. And the story is from eyewitnesses on the ground. There's a book called The First Americans by archaeologist Christopher Hardiker that describes quite the drama. Men with guns show up at the site, confiscate artifacts, and ban people from excavating. They then accused Cynthia Irwin Williams and her workers of artifact planting. And he describes that this site wasn't like something you'd see with and he describes with this site that it wasn't soft dirt by any means. It was more like paleontology. Like you had to have a hammer and chisel to even break through, and it was slow, meticulous work, right? Yeah. So the idea that you'd plant artifacts, in his opinion, was just nonsense. And so time goes on, and they do have a lot of these samples of the ash still, and it kind of just gets memory hold. They weren't allowed to go back and excavate. And the person that actually, according to Hardiker, ordered this was the director of the National Museum in Mexico City. I believe his name is Dr. Luis Lorenzo. Luke, maybe cut that part out. We don't need to say his name. But the director of the National Museum of Mexico is who ordered for this to happen, according to Christopher Hardiker in his book. Now, let's fast forward to the 70s. All of a sudden, new dating methods start to come out. And I believe this is the early days of uranium series dating, which is considered a lot more accurate than carbon dating. Carbon dating also maxes out at like 60,000 years or something like that, right? So uranium
about
series,
50,000 years.
Okay, how long?
About 50,000 years, as far as
50,000 years.
I think that's like the round number, yeah.
Right, and so uranium series dating has a much higher limit. And so there's a geologist named Virginia Steen McIntyre that comes back with some other colleagues, and they decide to test this again with this new dating method because all the confiscation of artifacts has happened, but they still have the Hueyatlaco ash, and you can still easily go get some of it at this reservoir in Puebla. Like they know where it's at. It was a gigantic geological event that left this. And they start getting some wild numbers. So it comes back. This is Virginia Steen McIntyre and Vance Haynes. And they use uranium series dating. And the ash above the artifacts, that little pink line there, is dated to 250 to 800,000 years old. Now that's a big number, right? That's a big range, but the point is it was very old.
Right.
And here you have artifacts that were found in bed C and E and bed I. And so immediately they get ridiculed. Virginia Steen McIntyre claims that her funding was cut, that she faced professional harassment. And, some of that might have just been genuine professional critiques. There's nothing wrong with trying to poke holes in things, but she claims she lost funding over this and work over this simply for publishing these results. And so fast forward a few years later, and there's a gentleman named Marshall Payne, I believe from Texas A&M, that decided he wanted to go look at Hueyatlaco again. And so He has a interesting little test he does. He does, like, I guess you could call it a blind study. That way no one was going to get in trouble. At this point, we not only have uranium series dating, but they have something called fission track dating. So he sent ash samples to a guy named Ray Donelick at one university and Kenneth Farley at another place. Ray Donelick was going to do fission track dating. Kenneth Farley was going to do a uranium series dating. They had no idea what this was for. He didn't tell them. That way they could just post the results with a clear conscience, right? And so Ray Donelick's fission track dating comes back to 250,000 years. This is another dating method. And then Kenneth Farley's uranium series dating comes back to 400,000 to 500,000 years.
Wow.
Okay. So, well, then what happens next, and I'm sorry if this is a little technical for everybody, but this is important. There becomes a argument about, can you see my cursor right now on the screen, Luke?
Yeah, go ahead. You're good.
Okay. So there becomes an argument about whether beds C and E, maybe these artifacts landed in there due to some type of floodplain erosion. And that would explain bed C and E. Remember, we're not talking about bed I yet. So there was a really good there was a really good geologist named Ken Farley that just was a skeptic. And he came in and he started dating Hal Malday, one of the original geologists on the site. And he made the argument that that's what was going on with bed C and E, or that could explain the anomaly, that there was some type of erosion that happened here. Now, Hal Malday said, nope, this is not correct. He denied that. He had his reasons. You can go watch my video for it. I play Hal Malday's rebuttal. He did it on camera. But at the end of the day, they were still just talking about bed C and E. Bed I here, clearly underneath the Hueyatlaco ash. Even the skeptics admitted bed I was under there. There was no erosion. If something was found there, it was found there. And what they decided there, the skeptics, was Cynthia Irwin Williams just made a mistake, that maybe her notes were a little sloppy. They started kind of critiquing her notes. She had maybe crossed out one area and put it in another area. And so that was the explanation for bed I. Well, despite that, there's one more little twist in this story. And that is, at the time, early 2000s, early 90s, up into the 2000s, there's this new, what they describe as kind of almost like an esoteric science. Today, I think it's much more of an accepted science called diatom analysis. So diatoms, and I'm not a geologist, but from what I understand about them, are these little microscopic organisms that live, and they have these kind of almost crystal-like shells, and you can go in there and they know the different dates that some of these diatoms have become extinct. So when they did this diatom analysis, I believe in the early 2000s, there was a specialist named San Van Landingham that came in, was asked to do some work on this. He had no fight in this battle. And he did a diatom stratigraphy test, basically, on this. They called it diatom biostratigraphy. And the diatoms in that area of bed C and D were dated to over 80,000 years, extremely old. And he says he did it in a way that would show that they were tested right where those artifacts would have been found, and that those artifacts were not placed there by flooding or erosion. And even the skeptics, Ken Farley included, said, yeah, that's something we need to try to understand better. Like, he didn't have an answer for the diatom test. So regardless of whether, you believe that there was erosion right here, the diatom test was showing that this is at least 80,000 years old. And then bed I, the only explanation they had for that was, well, she must have got sloppy and made a mistake.
Right. Yeah. So those earlier dating tests that are going out to 250,000 to 800,000 years. And even if those earlier tests were not accurate, it's still showing that those dates are reaching really, really far into the past. So it's like, well, if it's an exaggerated date, well, how much are we exaggerating here? Like, if it's
Right.
not 250,000, what is it? 125,000?
Right. Exactly. And then, there's people often say, well, where's the rest of the evidence? And that's a good question. Hueyatlaco truly is an enigma.
Right.
However, there are some other sites throughout the Americas that are pushing the boundaries a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't think there's consensus on any of it, but there's a national park, I believe it's called Cerro and Capoeira in
Mhm.
Brazil, that has rock art that one of the archaeologists that's studying it down there believes is pushing 100,000 years. And there's also the site, oh, Luke, you're going to have to help me with the pronunciation if you know it. The site out by San Diego, where they found the mammoth tusk that was sitting upright as if it had been placed there, and it was cracked in a way that it suggested that
Uh,
someone was trying to extract the marrow, which is not something like, it looked like it had been purposely done with some hands.
I
And
do
it's
know
at
what you're
least
talking about,
100,000
yeah.
years old. Which,
There's also the Galt site in Austin, Texas. I've been there. That's dated between 19,000 to 23,000 years ago. You've got the Meadowcroft site in Pennsylvania that I'm going to go to sometime in the spring. That's dated to 19 to 23,000 years ago. But
White
you know,
Sands, New Mexico.
yeah, obviously, yeah, that's the big one. Yeah, all of those sites, the archaeologists that work there, one of my favorite archaeologists, Brian Fagan, he's a specialist in the prehistoric world. I mean, they all say that evidence of humans in the Americas prior to Clovis is like almost impossible to find.
Yeah.
Not because they weren't there, but because it's so ridiculously hard to find it because it can be 20 feet below the ground where you're
Right.
standing, and it might be one shard of evidence, and if you're off by a foot, you'll never see it. But
Right.
clearly and obviously, it's hard to imagine that people were in the Americas, in Pennsylvania, New Mexico, California, Texas, Mexico, all the way down to South America
Right.
20,000 years ago.
Right. And I think that seems
8,000 years before Clovis.
right. And I think that most archaeologists at this point are ready to move on from Clovis first. Would you agree with that? Like, it seems like
Yeah.
I think people are starting to say, yeah, 22,000 years is what a lot of people would probably say now. But
Well, and
what's
what I
crazy
don't
that way, it's all
understand what I don't understand is the thinking behind Clovis first. Like, Clovis technology is pretty sophisticated to make
yeah,
those spear projectile points. That's not I don't just see how you arrive in the Americas and you're able to do that. Obviously, I mean, for anybody watching who doesn't quite understand, I mean, I had heard Clovis first for a decade before I actually understood what that meant when I was a lot younger.
same.
But the Clovis points are probably the most sophisticated projectile points that are ever created in the Americas, and they're basically the very first era of projectile points. And the reason is because you have these sophisticated hunter gatherers wandering around North America, including Mexico as well, who are not at the top of the food chain the way humans are today. And you have all this ridiculously large, aggressive megafauna. North America is like the African Serengeti
Oh
during
yeah.
the Ice Age on steroids. It's
Yeah.
just the most dangerous continent you can be on. And
Yeah.
so they had to develop these very sophisticated, very large projectile points to be able to survive in that realm. But it seems obvious to me that that would be something that they would work their way up to and not just arrive in America guns blazing.
So they've seen the Clovis migration,
Mhm.
right? From, I think they've found a lot of stuff in Alaska and Canada, but I don't, it's hard to think that they were the first ones. And I think a lot of people probably agree with that now,
Yeah.
especially with White Sands. White Sands seems to be the big one. And yeah, I'm from Western Kansas, and so I spent a lot of time out in Eastern Colorado and, just the Eastern Plains. Yeah, it's crazy to think about what was going on out there 20,000 years ago, or
Yeah.
even during the time of Clovis, right? It was, like you said, the did you say the African Serengeti
Yeah, yeah.
on steroids? I love that. Yeah, for sure. And shout out to our friend Michael Button. He's done a video on this that really got some wide appeal as well. Joe Rogan shouted it out about
Yep.
Hueyatlaco,
Yep.
which is cool because it really was just memory hold. There's a little Wikipedia page about it. I actually went down there and saw the place where they probably dug and talked to the locals. They remembered Cynthia Irwin Williams. It's all covered in houses now. And so I don't know if we'll ever be able to get somebody to excavate at Hueyatlaco again, but it's a big area, Pueblo, Mexico. I would really like to see more excavation efforts somewhere around that reservoir.
Yeah, that's amazing, man. One day, we're gonna have to do a conversation over the first Americans. That's a very fascinating topic. Yeah, I mean, you're right about the Clovis migration. I guess my thought is that those people who arrived here first, they didn't all die. They were still here, and that's a fascinating thing. Is even when you think about the Clovis people moving into the Americas, they were finding people who were already here. Had
Yeah,
to be already people living here. That's crazy, man. It's like every century, the amount of knowledge that we have of the first Americans keeps getting pushed back. One more edge, one more edge. It's crazy. I don't think it'll be. I mean, I think eventually we're going to find some kind of like irrefutable evidence of people being here 100,000 years ago. Because I mean, if the jaguar can get to South America on land rafts or whatever they say,
yeah,
come on,
yeah.
there had to be people with 120 IQ that could make their way here.
Right. And here's the thing too, um, with Hueyatlaco, those numbers are old enough that maybe we're not even talking about a Homo sapien.
That's
Like
right.
that number is pretty old. Um,
Mhm.
and so I'm not saying it isn't a Homo sapien, but that always makes me wonder as well. And here's the other thing too. This might be an isolated thing. Maybe the reason we don't see a lot of it in the fossil record, maybe there wasn't that many people that made it over. Maybe this was
Yeah.
just small little groups, little blips in time, little blades of grass on the football field, right? Just whoop,
Mhm.
and then died out. Whoop,
Mm.
died out, right? When you talk about the fossil record, one of the reasons Clovis is so fascinating is because there's just so much of it. Boom. You see all these Clovis artifacts everywhere,
Yeah.
and they
Literally
know
everywhere.
exactly when they showed up and when it ended. And so you're right. Clovis, now that I'm pretty sure everyone accepts that like White Sands is probably over 20,000 years old,
Yeah.
as well as those other sites, they definitely then, if that's the case, showed up and encountered other people. And yeah, it's wild to think about.
What points are we finding any projectile points with pre-Clovis sites or no?
Well, so
I know there's stone tools, but I don't know why I don't know about points. I need to Google that.
so at Hueyatlaco, they're more so stone tools. They're not
Mhm.
projectile points. There's another site, and I'm not sure, to be
Dude, so
honest.
these guys are just running away from giant animals.
Right. Yeah. Or yeah,
It's
exactly.
crazy.
They're doing smaller. Yeah. Who knows? Who knows? But
Trapping maybe
right.
with wooden tools. Golly, that's
But
crazy.
there's another place in California. I believe it's called Calico Early Man Site.
I've heard
And it's
that.
maybe not as, there might actually be some legit problems with what they were considering to be tools. I think the argument is literally whether what they found or not is actually a human made tool.
Mm,
But at one point, it was popular enough to have its own sign. It's like government sign recognizing the site and its significance for archaeology and geology. I actually went there on a little road trip a couple of years ago. This sign is like cut in half. It's dilapidated. It's not, it's like on the map, but it says permanently closed on Google Maps. And I
Oh,
went
yeah.
out there, the wind was blowing like 50 miles per hour. It was the same trip that I went and saw the Blythe and Taglios.
Yep.
And yeah, there's a site called Calico Early Man site out there that was also like 100 and some thousand years old.
Wow. You know what would be interesting is if we went and looked at Hueyatlaco, these two sites in California. I know Meadowcroft is this way. Be interesting to see the elevation of White Sands or its proximity to the nearest river. But my guess is that a lot of these really really old sites are buried 20 feet in like the shore of a river or something like that. These people are following the river to navigate. It takes quite a lot of people and quite a bit of uh, I should say like mastering of your tools and of your crafts to be able to venture off into the woods. I
Yeah.
was I was I was out hunting over the Christmas break with one of my buddies, and we were talking about what his land would have been for the Caddo people, or for any of the like the archaic hunters or the Clovis hunters or whatever. And I was breaking down the proximity of where he was to the river, and I was trying to tell him, all right, man, you got to think of Native Americans as being people who live in the woods, and that was only true. I mean, it was only true during the later periods. Let's call it like the latter half of people being in the Americas. Most of the time, their existence is along the bodies of water and right next to it. So they're actually looking into the woods, right? So
Right.
so much of the evidence of their habitation is going to be right next to, or honestly in the water, like inside riverbeds that are,
Yeah.
rushing streams that are 10 feet high today or something. But it's only at a site like Meadowcroft in Pennsylvania where there's this bend in the river, and they found, I think they're caves, but I haven't been to the site, but it's up above the river inside of caves, or well above the river. And so all these other sites are a little bit separated. And so I think that that's why they're so rare, is because it's not along a river. It's not obvious. A lot of these places are found by accident,
Yeah.
and it's they're already so deep in the ground. I mean, that coming across the evidence of them is going to be difficult. And the other thing I should say is a lot of times a dig will be carried out in the early 1900s, and they'll only go so deep, and then someone will come back 100 years later and go several layers deeper, and then boom, find something. So
Yeah.
I imagine there's going to be a lot of, rather than finding new sites, there's going to be a lot of, you know what, let's return back to that site and dig a little deeper.
Yeah.
You know?
If that site was good enough for these humans, it would be good enough for, it's like
So
oftentimes you
true.
find stuff even today where it's like, this is an awesome spot. And you look over and you're like, oh, there's an arrowhead. They also thought this was an awesome spot. Good view, right? Or whatever it
Exactly.
is.
Exactly.
And
And a foot below that can be a Clovis point. So
exactly.
11,000 years ago, they thought that was a good spot too.
Another point about your point with the rivers is like we think of like areas around rivers and creeks as being a good place to go find artifacts because like rivers change, the meander changes, right? The direction changes, and so it carves out a new little path and it exposes layers, and then all of a sudden you can find some
Right.
artifacts. It's like, that we can find a lot of stuff there, but how long before that river completely obliterates those artifacts, right?
Mhm.
What happens if that happens continually over 20,000 years? Do those artifacts just turn to, get completely eroded away? So yeah, I mean, and here's the thing, I'm totally sympathetic to the question of, well, where's the rest of the stuff? Like, where's the rest of the evidence showing man was in the Americas for 100,000 plus years? Yeah, there's a couple that we've cited here that are interesting, but there's so few of them that they all are still considered anomalies or enigmas.
Yeah.
But that is the story of Hueyatlaco. 3 different dating methods, actually 4 different dating methods over basically half a century, 40 years. And those dating methods started with carbon dating. Okay. It's all they had at the time, best they had. Uranium series dating, fission track dating, And then the most interesting one to me, because it kind of, all these people were squabbling over the whether there was any erosion or not. But you had this guy come in with a diatom analysis, which was brand new at the time, and it was showing 80,000 plus years at minimum. Just at minimum. That's just all that identifies is when did the diatoms in this particular sample go extinct, and it was 80,000. They'd been around for much longer than that.
Sure.
So that's just the minimum age. So
Hell yeah. What's your gut tell you?
I think that, yeah, I think that there was something going on there. I don't know if it was Homo sapien, but some type of bipedal hominid that had tools, I think, was in modern day Pueblo, Mexico, at least, I'll say at least 80,000 years ago. I'll play it safe. I'll play it safe there. So
yeah, I feel the same way, right? It's like when people say, oh, you know, the conquistadors were lying about how many people the Aztecs were sacrificing in one day. There's no way they could sacrifice 80,000 people. It's like, all right, well, what, 40,000?
Right. How many? Exactly. That's another topic we could talk about, but exactly. So
Yeah.
Hueyatlaco, you know, a lot of people, including the archaeologists, that there's been a couple archaeologists get upset that I made the video. But this isn't me trying to hate on those archaeologists. But like the Wikipedia site for Hueyatlaco needs to be updated, and it needs to be updated correctly. I don't even know if they talk about the diatom analysis. It really tries to kind of debunk it with the floodplain that we talked about. But they don't even talk about what really bed eye too much, if I remember right.
Really?
Remember,
Wow.
the bed eye, one more time, if you want me to, just so we can kind of,
yeah, sure.
the conclusion. I read Christopher Hardiker's book. I did go down to the site, and then there's a good old documentary that's called Hueyatlaco, an Archaeological Enigma, that was filmed. It's old, and there's only like part 1, part 2, part 3 on YouTube. You got to go like find it.
Yeah.
And so what I did, my role in this was I just took all that information, the timeline, and made kind of a more concise video for people to kind of digest this.
Yeah.
But bed eye, remember bed eye, their only kind of like explanation was, well, she made a mistake. Cynthia Irwin Williams didn't really, it's pretty clear from her notes, she didn't necessarily want the dating to come out. She also was like, hey guys, let's pump the brakes on the dating. Like she wasn't bragging about this, saying, I figured this out. There's been humans in the Americas for all this time. She was actually quite humble about it. But as far as I know, and as far as what Christopher Hardiker said in his book, she never agreed with the claim that she got bed eye wrong. She never agreed to that. So in fact, she might have been, I don't even know when they started saying that. That might have been a later thing, well after she had passed away. A lot of these people are now dead. Christopher Hardiker has died. Hal Malday is no longer here. I think Virginian Steen McIntyre might still be alive. I'm not sure on that. Maybe somebody in the comments can tell us. But most of these characters are now gone. So,
yeah, you know, that's a fascinating phenomenon in archaeology. Mexico is not a very and hasn't ever been a very, let's say, pro-woman whatever place. And I'm not trying to be one way or the other. I'm not a male feminist, but three, off the top of my head, 3 of the most important discoveries in the archaeology of Mexico are due solely to crazy women. 1, this Hueyatlaco discovery. 2, the discovery of the Red Queen at Palenque, right next to the Pyramid of Inscriptions. And then 3, the solving of the Olmec dating system. That was, I think it's Stela C from, it might be San Lorenzo, but Marion Sterling, she was the one that did that. And then they had this nasty, like I was telling you before we started recording, this nasty debate that took place in the U.S., maybe in New Orleans, maybe at Tulane, over whether or not, you know, like I was telling you, they were trying to sweep the Olmec civilization right under the rug because all of the Maya archaeologists, they had all the power, and they were like, Maya is the origin of Mesoamerica, blah blah blah. So they tried to sweep the Olmecs under the rug, but it was a woman who did that.
Yep.
So kind of a lot. That's an interesting phenomenon. I bet you there's more examples too.
So on this note, I'm also going to preface this with, like, I'm not one of these male feminists. Like,
Yeah,
that's not my angle here at all. But a lot of the archaeologists involved down there are on camera, Christopher Harker included in his book, saying they believe that the museum director of the National Museum of Mexico, who had all the power in this case, that he was jealous that, one, an American made this discovery,
sure.
and two, it was an American woman. And it's like, maybe
Mhm.
that's a cop out, but like, it's very possible. So here's the thing, two things on this.
What year was that again?
Well, the discovery was 1959 of
Okay.
the bone that had carvings, and then well into the 1960s is when the excavation happened. I don't know the exact year,
Yeah, yeah.
but
So this is kind of, this may not be anything, that this might just be a subtle thing, but I think the discovery with with Marion Sterling and the Olmecs was about a couple decades before that. So
yeah,
there's a little history there that
right,
could be sitting in the back of these people's minds.
right. And so on this note right here, I often get people in the comments. They say, well, they were tired of these Americans coming down and taking control of their sites and taking their artifacts back to the United
Yeah,
States. The Mexican people, I'm glad they did that. The Mexican people deserve to have these artifacts. And it's like, no, bro, these artifacts are gone. They're gone forever.
of course.
Like, this is the hip bone, that hip bone, which is possibly at the time the oldest artifact that's artwork in the Americas and one of the coolest artifacts. It's just an awesome artifact. It is gone. No one knows where it's at. At one point, there was, I think, a cast or a replica of it in the Smithsonian. That's how big of a deal it was. It made a huge archaeological magazine. Like, they were
Wow.
embracing this at first, and now it's gone. No one knows where it's at. So when I hear that, I just laugh. I'm like, no, this isn't one of those. You're trying to make this a thing about, oh, these, they're taking their sovereignty back. No,
Yeah,
this
yeah.
was like corruption, and those artifacts are gone, and it was archaeological mismanagement. And when I call it a cover up, people are like, well, is it because they didn't want this discovery to come out because of some political reason? I don't really think so. I think it was one guy got jealous, hubris and ego. He had a lot of
Yeah,
power and he exercised it, and now it's a
yeah.
mess.
Yeah,
I think it's
exactly,
an
man.
isolated case. So
That that what you just said is what I think is really at the root of a lot of things that get kind of lambasted as archaeological conspiracies and cover-ups. It's really just small scale, but about things that are important, corruption within the archaeological world. But
just like
not
anything,
phenomena. Yeah, exactly. That's what I was gonna say. Nothing that you wouldn't see in every other industry, you know?
anything. Right.
Zahiwas is like the number one example I can give here in Egypt. All the under the table artifacts that disappear from these digs and
Yeah.
end up in rich European basements. I mean, that exact thing happens all around the world. So,
And
yeah,
there is a group I see online, that's like, there's two groups going at each other, the people that are skeptical of archaeologists and archaeologists defending archaeology. Great. We have to admit, though, that this happens in every industry. You're wild to think it doesn't happen in archaeology. And in my opinion,
yeah,
Hueyatlaco is like the best example of ego getting in the way of the scientific method being conducted.
yeah,
You know what I
absolutely,
mean?
man.
So
Yeah. Well, Will, thanks for coming on, man. I really appreciate it. There's many more topics we're gonna have to talk about.
anytime, Luke, I appreciate it, man.